good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for week 6 of our journey together from hungry ghosts to being human without stopping in hell. At the moment, everyone's mics are muted, and when it comes to questions and answers, I'll unmute them. Or I'll allow you to unmute yourself. You are allowed to rename yourself. You want to change the name on the participant screen. If you want to send a message at any point, if you send it to the host, and I should pick it up on my screen, particularly if you want to send a message, a question for later, or anything else for that matter. But primarily, could you keep it addressed to everyone and not just the host, so that we can all see it? I just want to start a quick summary of the journey so far, just to put everything into context. So week 1, we started off looking at on some truths, the truth of impermanence, truth of karma, some sort of universal truths, and then even the truth of our own cravings and aversions, and our surrendering to that truth. We looked at the quality of truthfulness and what that might mean, and we looked at a commitment to truthfulness, a commitment to a new life. So surrendering to what is, and a commitment to change. Week 2, we looked at generosity, both in terms of generosity of thoughts, words and deeds, and just cultivating a sense of generosity and the process of giving. Week 3, we looked at the benefits of living in harmony with the Buddha's 5 suggestions, the 5 precepts, which lead to harmlessness for ourselves and those around us, and leads to blamelessness. Week 4, we looked at loving kindness and the other heart practices. We looked at universal friendliness, we looked at compassion, we looked at joy and appreciation, and we looked at equanimity, or this creative understanding and response to how things really are. Last week we looked at transgression and forgiveness. So we looked at how harm comes about from a different angle, to how not living in harmony with the 5 precepts brings about harm. And we looked at the process of forgiveness that we might apply both to ourselves and to others. And this week we're going to look at a really big subject of meditation and mindfulness. I'll try to squeeze in as much of that topic as possible tonight. But first, I think we're going to start with a meditation, our usual meditation, which is technically a concentration meditation. It's a serenity meditation, a tranquility meditation, intended to unify the mind, to calm the mind. Okay. From a Buddhist perspective, we're all asleep. We're all under a spell, an enchantment, hidden in the biases and distortions that are innate in being a member of the human species. If we are to break the spell, then we must wake up and become disenchanted. But we cannot do this if we do not see the truth of our current existence, the truth of how things really are. In the next 40 minutes, we will look at mindfulness, and we'll look at meditation, mainly in the domains of serenity and insight. But we're going to start tonight's leg of our journey, with a short serenity or tranquility meditation, which is intended to deliberately calm the breath, to relax the body and to still the mind. A meditation that is deliberately intended to cultivate spaciousness and contentedness. As we have done so previously, we'll close the meditation with the cultivation of joy through smiling. So you might take an upright dignified posture, a posture that represents your heart's desire to awaken. Your heart's desire to move away from suffering, to move towards the end of suffering. If it's comfortable for you, you might let your eyes gently close. Let your face be soft and allow your jaw to relax. Let your shoulders drop back naturally to open up the heart area. Allow your arms and your hands to rest easily. Feel yourself grounded and supported here amongst fellow travellers. We might start by taking a very deep breath, completely filling our lungs, followed by a very long, slow, deliberate breath out. And maybe another very deep breath in, completely filling the lungs. And then a very long, slow breath out, feeling the breath in the whole body. Letting the shoulders drop back, relaxed, opening up the heart area. And perhaps one more very deep breath in, completely filling the lungs. And a long, slow breath out. This time letting your belly be soft. The Buddha's instructions for the cultivation of serenity are very simple. When breathing in, you know that you're breathing in. When breathing out, you know that you're breathing out. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. That's it. There's nothing else to do. There's nowhere else to go. There's no one special to be or to become. Just be yourself. For the next 5 minutes or so, you're invited to practice breathing in and out. You're invited to practice calm and pleasant abiding in the here and now. Breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. Breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out-breath. If you lose your awareness of the breath, just notice that. smile, and make a silent, gentle, friendly note of not breath, and return your full awareness to this magical process of breathing. Breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. Breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out. It doesn't matter whether you lose sight of the breath 5 times or 50 times or 500 times during this short meditation. What's important is that you realize and recognize that you've lost sight of the breath. And with a smile, you return your awareness to your breathing. Each time we notice we've lost the breath is a moment of mindfulness. And each time we commit to going back to our meditation, back to the watching the breath, is a moment of meditation. The cultivation of attention, the cultivation of concentration. One of the purposes of our serenity meditation, our tranquility meditation, is to develop bliss and develop contentedness, to develop joy. These aren't the final resting places on our journey, but they're very suitable places to stop off and literally take a breath. So we might change our object of meditation now and recite silently like a whisper at the back of our mind. Breathing in, I calm the body. And breathing out, I smile. Breathing in, I calm the body. Breathing out, I smile. Thank you. So it's a big topic tonight. We've just scratched the surface of some of this, and lots different traditions have different views on what mindfulness means and what meditation means. There are many types of meditation approaches to it. So I'm just going to give you my understanding from a perspective of someone waking up to this life, someone perhaps new to recovery from drug or alcohol or any other addictions, new to recovery from anxiety or recovering from anxiety or depression. So put our first steps on this path to the liberation of the heart. So we're going to start with looking at mindfulness and what is mindfulness, and start with a couple of clinical definitions. Famously, John Kabat-Zinn described mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, it's not the best of definitions, but at least he does make the point that mindfulness is simply, not just doing things very slowly, and mindfulness is not relaxation spelt differently. An alternative clinical definition from the American Psychological Association says that mindfulness is a moment-to-moment awareness of one's experience without judgment. In a sense, mindfulness is a state, not a trait. While it might be promoted by certain practices or activities, such as meditation, it is not equivalent to or synonymous with them. Following on from these two definitions, I would like to make an important distinction between the difference that we might call clinical mindfulness and what we might call Buddhist mindfulness. And that is this non-judgmental observation techniques that are encouraged by clinical mindfulness practices. They're not quite the same as wise discernment or the wise response epitomized in Buddhist mindfulness, and illustrated in many talks and images offered by the Buddha in the early Pali text. But to some degree, this is just my opinion, this distinction between non-judgment and discernment, I think is very very important to discern what is a bad judgment as opposed to how things actually are at this moment, and what the wise response would be. Now, maybe rather simplistically, I have in the past offered this slide just as a starting point for what mindfulness might be. This faculty of not forgetting, keeping something in mind. I like to reference it as remembering to remember. One of my teachers, John Peacock, refers to it as present moment recollection. So this is a rather simplistic view I've offered in the past of just mindfulness being to keep something in mind, but that's a very important aspect, a very important characteristic of mindfulness. The Pali word that we translate into mindfulness is sati, which does mean it is this faculty of holding something in mind. And sati itself comes from a Sanskrit word, smrti, which has a general meaning of remembrance or reminiscence, or thinking of or thinking upon something, calling something to mind, or simply just memory. So as I said, I like to use the term remembering to remember, to hold something in mind, to remember something that you'd heard, particularly to remember something that's very important. To paraphrase the Buddhist monk Ajahn Jayasaya, to recollect whatever it needs to be recollected at this time and place. So what is important to hold in mind? What is important to remember In the book, Mindfulness, Ancient Wisdom Meets Modern Psychology, hopefully is the right way around on your screen, by William Kukian and Christina Feldman, mindfulness is summarized as having 4 functions: a simple knowing awareness, a protective awareness, an investigative awareness, and the quality of reframing perception and views. So going back to the simple awareness, as I say, John Peacock calls this awareness a present moment recollection. But a word of caution here, that awareness, although it's part of mindfulness, is not interchangeable with mindfulness. While as humans, we're naturally aware all the time, but our awareness is not always mindful. Whereas Buddhist mindfulness has intentionality. Buddhist mindfulness is always aware. So that simple knowing and awareness, the aspect of protective awareness, that mindfulness is grounded in ethical intentionality. We might say that if we undertake a vow or a commitment or a satya to change a behaviour in some way, or a commitment to the precepts, perhaps, commitment to harmlessness for self and others, a commitment not to relapse into old habits. This is where mindfulness becomes protective. It's a protective awareness. I mentioned last week the lovely image that the Buddha gives of the surgeon's probe and of gently investigating our wounds. So this investigative awareness, like the surgeon's probe, it investigates what's present, what's there, and what needs healing. So perhaps we most definitely we investigate the nature of suffering and how it arises and ends. And it's a friendly investigation, an affectionate inquiry, a discerning discovery. And then this last major faculty of mindfulness, this reframing perception and views. So promoting the movement from aversion to kindness, wise understanding and response, and particularly through the inclination of the heart-mind towards the qualities and attitudes of the Brahma Viharas, of kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So some important characteristics of Buddhist mindfulness that perhaps we don't find in clinical mindfulness is that mindfulness cares. Mindfulness is not ethically neutral. To practice mindfulness without ethics is like trying to row your boat across the ocean, but without first untying it from the bank. You can put in a hell of a lot of effort, but you're not going to get anywhere. And Buddhist mindfulness is always in the service of ending suffering. So one might say that you couldn't be a mindful burglar or a mindful sniper. Buddhist mindfulness is a deliberate and intentional activity of the mind. The ability to know what is the present moment experience with clarity. We know that the sound of a car is simply the sound of a car. So mindfulness is a deliberate heightened activity that acknowledges our present moment experience with intentionality, whereas awareness doesn't necessarily involve a choice or have any intentionality. Of course, there are many benefits of mindfulness, not least that with discernment, we can learn to drop our reactivity and our personal judgments, and we can learn to see things as they really are. Mindfulness is not just one thing, and it very much depends on our experience. Mindfulness provides protection, provides joy, provides understanding, amongst other things. Mindfulness holds something in our attention, holding the mind in the present moment. As well as being mindful of the present moment, we also need to be mindful of things that make our lives and the lives of others around us better or worse. From my experience, I need to be mindful of the Brahma Viharas, those noble qualities of heart-mind, as I try to respond to this present moment experience. I need to remember to be mindful. I need to remember to remember. I need to remember the truth of impermanence. I need to remember the law of karma, that my actions have results. I need to remember the nature of distress, how it arises and how it can end. Mindfulness is also being aware of the climate of my mind, where my mind is at this moment in time, where I'm living, where my mind is dwelling right now. So in terms of Buddhist cosmology and moving from the realm of the hungry ghosts, through the realm of the animals, through the realm of the hot and cold torture hells, moving through the realm of the heavenly realms or the human realm, knowing where my mind is and what mind states I'm generating is very important. There's another slide I'd like to share, if I can do it without losing my screen again. And some of us might recall a 1970s Japanese series called Magic Monkey, and it always used to, the opening credits always had the phrase, "With our mind we create the world," which is a rough translation of the first verse of the Dhammapada, the short sayings of the Buddha. A couple of translations in part of that first verse. One of them goes, "Experiences are preceded by mind, led by mind, and produced by mind." Another translation of the same verse puts it as, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." So where my mind is, being mindful of where my mind is very important to how I create an image of myself, this process of selfing, and how I relate to my experience, the process of world building. I've mentioned before the quote from the Buddha's talk on two types of thinking, where he says, what the mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the inclination of the mind. And then I've also related how Christina Feldman rephrases that particular quote to, what the mind frequently thinks and ponders shapes the mind, and the shape of your mind shapes your world. Mindfulness is not just one thing. Mindfulness has these many aspects and facets. And the Buddha offers us many images intended to illustrate the broader depth and breadth of the application and benefits of mindfulness. And I often give a talk on these images, but we simply don't have time today to explore these images. But just to say that these images portray mindfulness as an awareness of the body and mind, as an ethically grounded wisdom. Mindfulness is revealing or uncovering that which has been hidden. Mindfulness is preparing the ground for something new. This image of a ploughman. Mindfulness as vigilance, as controlling a forward direction of our experience. Mindfulness as a charioteer, or charioteer as mindfulness. Mindfulness as protection for the senses. This image of a citadel with guards at the doors. Mindfulness as a calming, stabilizing factor, cultivating wisdom. And the surgeon's probe, mindfulness as a friendly, affectionate investigation, promoting healing, well-being and wholeness. Because mindfulness is a deliberate, ethically focused action, it is closely connected with wisdom. In fact, it might be said that the only wise response to a situation is the mindful response. The Buddha says, when a noble disciple is rid of craving, rid of aversion, unconfused, aware and mindful, they cultivate a heart full of love, a heart full of compassion, a heart full of joy, a heart full of equanimity, spreading into the first direction, to the second direction, to the third, to the fourth. In the same way, above, below, across, everywhere, all around, they spread a heart full of love, compassion, joy, and equanimity to the whole world. Abundant, expansive, limitless, free of hostility and ill will. So that's meditation, sorry, that's mindfulness and awareness. Now we might take a brief look at meditation, more in a more formal sense. Meditation that falls roughly, and as this across traditions, this will be different, but meditation that falls roughly into two domains: the domain of serenity and the domain of insight. And that potentially there is a third domain, this domain of the heart practices, of the cultivation of these Brahma Viharas. And we also might include the cultivation of dana and forgiveness within those heart practices, all of which we've touched upon in previous weeks here. But for today, we might take a brief look at the complementary practices of serenity and insight. Serenity in meditation, or tranquility meditation, or calm abiding meditation, or usually all lumped together under heading of concentration meditation. But really, concentration doesn't cover what this approach to meditation is actually about. And although I'm using the word meditation, I fall into that trap. I should really be using the word bhavana, this process of bringing something into being, of cultivating something. Meditation doesn't have the word meditation doesn't have this same connotation, whereas the cultivation of tranquility, the cultivation of serenity, the cultivation of single-pointedness is much more to the point. So serenity practice, or serenity meditation, or serenity bhavana is different from the practice of mindfulness. They do overlap, for sure, but they are two different functions of the mind that operate simultaneously or in tandem. The dictionary definition of concentration is the act or process of concentrating, the state of being concentrated, especially directing the concentration to a single object. And often this type of meditation is referred to as single-pointedness. Synonyms, the dictionary synonyms, are absorption, attention, engrossment, enthrallment, immersion. Interestingly, and perhaps usefully, the opposite of concentration, or an antonym, is inattention. How we live our life, not attending to it. So I may use the words serenity and concentration synonymously and interchangeably in the next few minutes. In terms of serenity breath meditation, the breath can be both a means to calm us down and a means to train in the practice of mindfulness, the practice of keeping something in mind, the practice of remembering to remember. Serenity is said to open the door to insight, to open the door to wisdom. There's a famous sutta by the Buddha on meditation called the Anapanasati Sutta, mindfulness of breathing in and out, broken down into 16 steps. And a couple of these steps are dedicated to cultivating and experiencing joy and bliss. And we'll actually try an Anapanasati step of meditation later on. How does serenity differ from mindfulness? Mindfulness, or even how does mindfulness differ from serenity? Mindfulness picks objects of attention and notices when the attention has gone. Serenity does the actual work of holding the attention steady on the object, on the chosen object. But if either of these partners is weak, then the meditation goes astray. So if there isn't mindfulness and there isn't serenity or concentration, then the meditation just goes astray. Leaving behind mindfulness for now, we might ask, what comes first? This practice of serenity or concentration that we're looking at now, or the practice we're going to look at the moment, insight meditation, vipassana? Which of these should come first? And the Buddha's cousin Ananda was asked this question, what should come first? And he said, well, sometimes we practice serenity, and when we're practicing it, it's followed by insight. He said, sometimes we practice insight, and as we're practicing insight, serenity arises. And he says, sometimes we practice both together. They both arise, or something similar. But certainly the Anapanasati Sutta, description of how to move from concentration through to insight, and even the Satipatthana Sutta, the foundations of mindfulness, has a similar path. There is some advantage to starting with concentration practices, to starting with serenity or tranquility practices. And one advantage of starting with serenity meditation in advance of insight meditation is so that we might learn to relax, we might learn to be at ease, we may temporarily at least abide calmly in the here and now. So a serene mind is not just a one-pointed mind, it's a composed mind, a unified mind, a collective mind. As you might have noticed, the mind has a mind of its own. Our thoughts, our feelings, our intentions all spread out in different directions. They seep out and go prowling around. So the purpose of developing one-pointedness is to unify our mind. I like to think of meditating for the sake of cultivating calm and joy, enjoying the breath, enjoying rapture, cultivating joy. One of the things that can interrupt our cultivation of serenity, our cultivation of tranquility, our concentration, are something called the 5 hindrances. And the 5 hindrances are manifestations, broader manifestations of the 3 poisons, the 3 fires, that the root. I don't know how to root distractions. They're normally termed as defilements. I'm not particularly happy with the term defilement, but greed, hatred, and delusion, craving, aversion, and confusion, infatuation, repulsion. But there are classic hindrances, these 5 hindrances that get in the way of our developing serenity, and these hindrances of craving for sensual pleasure. As we're sitting on the cushion, our mind goes off in various directions, and one of those directions might be craving for sensual pleasure, from the wildest sexual fantasy to just craving for a cup of tea. Or else we're sitting and our mind goes off in ill will to people, to ourselves, from mild frustration to deep anger. Or we might sit on the cushion and simply tune out, zone out, literally fall asleep on the cushion. Or we might sit on the cushion. Our meditation is overcome with anxieties and worries and agitation, and we simply can't keep still. And then we might be sitting on a cushion and we're immobilized by great doubt, and confusion, perplexion about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So these 5 hindrances, which I won't go into any great detail, they excuse me, they visit us on the cushion, and for me, they visit me in everyday life. They don't just exist on the cushion. They're just manifestations, as I say, of greed, hatred, and delusion, craving, aversion, and confusion. It's just that we get a greater focus of them on the cushion, or we get a greater focus on them when we try to still the mind. So if you if you come across these hindrances, we make them your friends. It's much easier to deal with them that way. And once we can drop the hindrances, once we can work through the hindrances, we can reach quite deep states of absorption, quite deep states of tranquility and serenity. And time tells me that that I need to move on from serenity to insight. And it's said that you can't move on to insight unless you do overcome those hindrances. But I'm not so sure. I am. I once, well, I've ordained as a monk a couple of times in Thailand, where it's traditional that you can ordain for set periods of time. In fact, in Thailand, unless a man ordains for at least one rainy season for 3 months, he's not actually considered right to marry. And if you have a government job, they'll actually give you 3 months off to become a monk once in your career. It's considered so important. But I've had the good fortune to ordain twice, just for, I think once for 29 days and once for 30 days, 31 days. During my first ordination, when I thought I would learn everything about Buddhism, everything about meditation, I'd come home a changed and enlightened man. I learned nothing at all. I just learned that my meditation was very painful. Meditating in full robes with no air conditioning, no instruction was no fun. But I didn't let it put me off. And a year later, after the first ordination, I went back to Thailand, and I went to a monastery in southern Thailand, Wat Suan Mok, for a 10-day silent retreat, where they, based on the Anapanasati Sutta, this discourse, this talk about mindfulness of breathing in and out, this 16 stages, 16 steps of meditation. And it was wonderful. It really cemented my interest in this whole path. But on that first 10-day silent retreat, I found it very difficult to settle over the first few days. I think I may have mentioned it on these talks before. My mind was constantly going off into planning in most minute details of travel plans, of laundry plans, which days I'd wash clothes and which clothes I'd wash on which days I would shave, and quite complex, minute planning. And normally we're instructed, just to let those thoughts go and go back to your object of meditation, back to your breath. But it was incessant, this same, what kept taking me away from my trying to develop serenity, trying to develop concentration, trying to develop single pointedness, was this incessant need to plan. So I had to take time out to look at what was happening here. And why did I need to plan so much? So I had to bring some insight, some investigative mindfulness into what's happening here. I had to use the surgeon's probe. And what I came to understand was my need, my incessant need to plan was my way of control, of trying to have control, trying to find safety and security in my environment. And this stemmed from having a very unstable childhood, from a childhood dominated by an alcoholic father and mother who was, if not alcoholic, at least a very heavy drinker, where nothing was safe, nothing was secure, nothing could be relied upon. So my coping mechanism was trying to plan everything in minute detail, to think that I was in control. So there was an insight coming out of meditation practice. There's an insight naturally coming out of concentration practice, and very much without judgment, using the surgeon's probe to sense the depth of my wounds and what needed for healing. So as I said before, we're all asleep. We're all under this spell, this enchantment that manifests as biases and distortions. of simply being human. And in order to wake up, we've got to break the spell. We've got to become disenchanted. And we can only do this by seeing things as they really are. So insight meditation, vipassana meditation, to see things clearly. To understand something deeply, to see it, to have insight into it. It's a quality of mind, which along with mindfulness and wisdom and discernment leads to our liberation. When mindfulness and serenity are harnessed together, they open up a whole new world of insight. Insight into the nature of reality, and particularly for something to be called an insight practice, into the nature of impermanence, these three characteristics of existence. So insight into the nature of impermanence, insight into the nature of distress and the arising of distress and the ending of distress, and insight into the nature of impersonality or non-self, not self, not to be misunderstood as no self, because quite clearly I have a self, and quite clearly you have a self. So, but it's about the impersonality of self. So, for something to be an insight practice, we must provide insight into those characteristics of reality. So insight might be described as practicing revelation, uncovering, seeing things clearly. We can have psychological insights, as I had at Swatsu and Mop, in seeing the nature of my distress and the origin of my distress. We can have biographical insights into our stories and narratives, which is also part of my insight at Swatsu and Mop. But for insights to truly liberate us, they've got to go beyond the psychological and go beyond the biographical. Certainly not ignoring them, but going beyond them into our innate sense of self, stepping out to see inside me, to see inside mind, to see inside myself, and to see the emptiness of that. A major insight can be into causality, that nothing is spontaneous. Everything arises on condition of something else. When this is, that is. When this ceases, that ceases. Seeing that everything is a result of cause and effect is a liberating insight, truly liberating. I can see myself sitting here talking to you tonight as a result of cause and effect. So this insight perhaps at times is scary, but nonetheless, it's very liberating. With insight, we can stop being the victims of cause and effect, but rather we can actually have an influence over cause and effect, particularly when we compare outcomes of skillful, wholesome actions, wise, mindful actions, and the outcomes of unskillful, unwholesome, unwise, unmindful actions. The unseen workings, unseen workings and effects of causality might be considered a magician's trick, a conjurer's deception, or the fact that we can't see these workings clearly, as if we are under a spell, as if we'd been enchanted. One of the analogies that the Buddha uses for enlightenment is to become disenchanted, to break the spell, as it were. Once we know how the trick is done, it loses its power over us. So as I said, for a practice to be, well, let me just step back a moment. There are sometimes I see teachers offering mindfulness meditation practice where the practice is simply to be and to let sounds be sounds and tastes be tastes and thoughts be thoughts. And I suppose this is mindfulness meditation, mindfulness practice, the cultivation of mindfulness. But I think this is very different from insight practice, where we deliberately set out with an inquiring mind to investigate the nature of impermanence, to investigate suffering, to gain insights into suffering, and to gain insights into the impersonal nature of reality, the emptiness of everything, that nothing has a spontaneous becoming or an intrinsic being. And I think there's a subtle difference between what might be termed mindfulness meditation and insight meditation. They probably overlap. Mindfulness, serenity, and insight requires us to remember what is necessary and helpful in this moment, what needs to be recollected, what needs to be kept in mind right here and now. We're encouraged to look inside ourselves for freedom and liberation, not to look outside of ourselves. We may gain some temporary relief from certain behaviors and experiences out there, but true long-lasting release is said to be an inside job. In Buddhism, freedom is the freedom from things, rather than in the secular world, the freedom to do things. So in Buddhism, we have freedom from craving, freedom from aversion, freedom from confusion, and all that entails, i.e. freedom from shame, freedom from blame, freedom from conflict, freedom from guilt, freedom from addictions, freedom from compulsions. Nirvana or nibbana is a bit like the process of selfing, this building a self, this constant process of building self, or this constant process of world building from our experience. Nibbana is the same. Nibbana is not a place, or nirvana is not a place that we get to, a destination we get to. It's something we experience in the here and now. And I sometimes just stop and ask myself, is there greed? Is there hate? Is there delusion present right now? And sometimes I can say, no, it's not present. It's just a pure moment of awareness, a pure moment without greed, without hatred, without delusion, a moment without craving, without aversion, without confusion, a moment without preferences, a moment without likes and dislikes. And in those moments is nirvana. So we can have nirvana here and now. It's just a question of getting more of those moments and putting them together. So I'd like to, rather than end on our usual Brahma Vihara meditation, I'd like to end on an insight meditation from the Anapanasati Sutta. And I'm going to share a slide with you. Okay, so I might ask you to take an upright, dignified posture. And we just settle down into a natural breath. Our posture's upright, dignified, alert. Perhaps taking a deep breath in and a very long, slow breath out, and then just letting the breath settle down. the founder of the monastery in southern Thailand, Wat Suan Mok, the founder's name was Bhikkhu Bodhidasa, I believe. He offered a shortcut method to Nibbana. He said we should practice steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the Anapanasati discourse. Steps 1, 2, 3, and 4 are about breathing in short, breathing in long, breathing in the whole body, and about relaxing the body with the breath. So knowing the short breath, knowing the long breath, knowing the breath in the whole body, and then using the breath to relax the body. He said the shortcut after that was to go straight to step 13 and contemplate impermanence. Contemplate the ever-changing nature of reality, the ever-changing nature of our present moment experience. Every sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, and thought. They come and they go. They arise and they disappear. Breathing in, I contemplate impermanence. Breathing out, I contemplate impermanence. We're not just allowing insight to arise during a mindfulness meditation sitting, we're actually directing the mind to contemplate impermanence. The impermanence of my voice, the impermanence of the taste on your tongue, the impermanence of the tactile touch between you and the floor, the impermanence of the thoughts arising and passing away. Is there anything in your experience that is not impermanent? Breathing in, I contemplate impermanence. Breathing out, I contemplate impermanence. Thank you. I'm sure there's a bit of a ramble there, and I didn't cover half of what I would have liked to have covered. and it's a very broad area. Mindfulness, serenity, insight. It covers an awful lot. I hope I haven't confused more than I've enlightened. If you have any questions, feel free to unmute your microphone, or if you haven't checked the chat box, if you wanted to chat, feel free to type in a message. Otherwise, I'm very happy to take, if you want to unmute yourself.
Hey, Vince. Hello.
Hi, Ken.
Hi, sir. Thank you for that. Could you list the Brahmaharas for me and the 5 hindrances? I was trying to catch those.
Right, list the Brahmaviharas and the hindrances.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Brahmaviharas are loving kindness or universal friendliness, compassion, the resonating of the heart, the quivering of the heart, joy, gladness, or appreciative joy, and equanimity, sometimes described as creative perspective. So friendliness, compassion, joy, and balance. Friendliness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Thich Nhat Hanh describes them as love, friendliness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness. So they're the Brahmaviharas, and as I say, you know, we could tack on generosity to that group, and we could tack on forgiveness to that group as well. But these are heart practices, and this is an end point, pretty much an end point in many of the Buddha's teachings for monastics and lay people alike. This is where we end up, inclining our heart in every direction with those qualities. The hindrances is wider blooming of greed, hatred, and delusion are a craving for sensual pleasure. So we crave, you know, for all the distractions that sensual pleasure bring us, from pleasant sights, pleasant sounds, pleasant tastes, pleasant tactile sensations, sex, drugs, and sausage rolls. You know, anything that can distract us, anything that takes our mind away from our object of meditation. But you know, for me, these 5 hindrances are, you know, they follow me to the supermarket. You know, they're in my life daily. It's a bit becoming aware of them. On the cushion's a good place to start to become aware of them, and then I can take that awareness into daily life. So the first one is this craving for sensual pleasure. Second one is ill will. Ill will towards ourselves, ill will towards the practice, ill will towards other people. Everything from, you know, acute hatred, mild irritation, all points in between. So the arising of ill will, irritation, discontent. It manifests itself in many ways. The third hindrance is called sloth and torpor. This falling asleep, this not being alert, this tuning out, not being present. And sometimes it's genuine on retreat. It can be genuine if you know, you work hard all year round, you go on retreat, and first day of retreat, you fall asleep on the cushion. You know, that's not sloth and torpor, that's genuine tiredness. So, you know, there's a distinction to be made there. You know, I don't want to be here, and I tune out. So sloth and torpor is number 3. Number 4 is anxiety and worry. Agitation, restlessness, not being able to settle, the mind running and running and running and running, and not being able to settle down. And then the last hindrance, this hindrance of doubt, doubt in the practice, doubt in the path, doubt in ourselves, confusion, not seeing things clearly. So yeah, they can all arise individually or together. And I used them in last week's forgiveness flowchart as mind states. We can often have these mind states, not just on the cushion, but in life. Suffering, directly to suffering. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Brenda has commented that the apparentness, I'd like to say, the apparentness of we are what we think. We are what we think. And then the more we sit on the cushion, the more we can see that, and the more we start to distinguish the different identities we hold in our life. And how these identities change from moment to moment, from experience to experience. Worker, manager, angry person, sad person, hungry person, teacher, meditator. And these are different identities that we create in our head. Or right now I'm a teacher. Earlier on today I was a dad, and I was a granddad, and these different identities. So we are what we think. So I can think pleasant. I can deliberately cast myself in a good light, or I can cast myself in a bad light. And the same applies to my experience. I build my world with my thoughts. I can be sitting at the same dinner table as someone, eating the same food, but experience a very different world. Very different world. They can live in they read certain newspapers, watch certain programs, hold certain views that keeps them in a very angry, dangerous world. I don't read those newspapers. I don't watch those television programs. I don't hold those views, and I live in a very different world. We inhabit the same space, but we live in different worlds. So with our mind, we create the world. We still have a few minutes left for questions and answers, or I might just share, as we're getting that way, I might just share a screen with you. It's this acronym I like to use about mindfulness, about responding appropriately. So being mindful of our present moment experience, being mindful of what leads to suffering and what leads away from suffering, being mindful of all the things that are helpful, being mindful in the sense of remembering that I'm going to die, remembering that others are going to die, and that puts a different slant on relationships and response. Being aware of what's actually happening, a true awareness of what's happening, and responding to the present moment experience rather than reacting to it, to reduce our reactivity. And that response should be appropriate. So there are lots of stories in the early Pali texts about this character called Mara, Mara the destroyer, Mara the evil one, Mara the saboteur. Mara came to visit the Buddha before his enlightenment and tried to knock him off his path, tried to stop him becoming enlightened. It's not Mara's job to drag us to hell. It's simply Mara's job to stop us in our tracks, to take us off the path. So I like to use this acronym of Mara as this mindful awareness responds appropriately. In the early Pali text, whenever Mara is spotted, whenever the young nun or the Buddha or anyone else spots the appearance of Mara, this self-sabotaging nature we have, they simply say, Mara, I see you. And then Mara disappointedly disappears. So unless someone has a burning desire, we might bring tonight to a close. Burning desire to ask a question, I should say, will bring tonight to a close. I just finished with just to recap that mindfulness is a practice on its own, but mindfulness does support serenity. And serenity brings a different quality to mindfulness. Mindfulness plus serenity together bring insight. Insight opens the door to possibilities, to potentiality. Insight opens the doors to liberation, to finding that perfect, unshakable liberation of the heart. The liberation from greed, the liberation from hatred, the liberation from ignorance. So freedom from craving, freedom from aversion, freedom from confusion. Next week, we're going to look at fellowship in terms of Sangha and community, in terms of good friends. And just to say that all these talks are offered freely, absolutely freely, open heart, open mind and open hands. Nothing is expected in return. But if you would like to offer dana, there's a link on the Hungry Ghost website to support these teachings and to support my livelihood. So thank you all again for joining me on this journey from Hungry Ghost to being human without stopping in hell. I hope to see you next week. Just to remind you that the sit and share meeting tomorrow at 7:30 UK time and on Monday at 7:30 UK time. So if you want to unmute your microphones and say goodnight, you're more than welcome to, or if you just want to leave silently, you're more than welcome to do that as well. Thank you all once again.